Hi, this is your host, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota. Joining me for the first time is a new co-host. You might recognize the name. It would be my brother, Joel Heitkamp, who is active in rural issues for a long, long time. First as a rural water manager and a state senator, and now as somebody who talks to, Joel, what is it, about 100,000 people every day on the radio and collects opinions and listens to what people are thinking about in rural America. Welcome, Joel.
Yeah, and thanks for letting me join you. I have to tell you, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun, and so appreciate it. And for those of you, she introduced me as her brother. That's a good thing because most people think I'm her nephew. So,
oh, for goodness sakes. And this is what I put up with on a regular basis. But we're going to have a great discussion with somebody that Joel and I know very well. And that is former Congressman Peterson, who is a legend in Washington, D.C. as it comes to rural advocacy and certainly as it comes to understanding the Farm Bill. I am so excited, and thank you so much, Colin. I know you're a busy guy. You aren't the kind of guy who likes to always sit down and have a conversation like this, but I think your voice is so critical. Can you tell me, first off, all-important question, do you think it is possible for the House of Representatives Ag Committee to get a bill out of committee? And even if they get a farm bill out of committee, do you think it's possible to pass a farm bill before this current bill expires?
Well, anything is possible if you put your mind to it. And, the good thing is that the people that are in charge are all saying the right things. They're all saying the same thing, that we're going to get this bill done. And that's on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the Capitol. And so they're all, determined to get this done. I would say being able to get it done in 2018 can show you that you can get it done anytime, because that was a real challenge in that bill. But the problem is going to be two problems. Are they going to get extra money for the Farm Bill? And all of the commodity groups and all these other folks are looking for more money. They've got ideas about how to spend it and so forth. So the Budget Committee, at least Arrington in the House, is asking for more money. So I think one of the issues is, are they going to get more money? If they get more money, it'll make it easier to get this done.
Yeah, Colin, there a lot of people listening wouldn't understand what you mean by get more money. And I think that's a critical component. If you could just kind of tell us how this whole argument about the debt limit and the budget targets affect the Farm Bill.
Well, the Farm Bill is what's called mandatory spending. This is spending that's not required. The appropriators do not have to appropriate the money. It's driven by a formula. So the parts that are in the Farm Bill are not appropriated. They're driven by a formula like crop insurance, food stamps, Title I, so forth and so on. So there's a baseline that's established. The CBO just came out with it last week that says that this is how much money is going to be spent in the next 10 years based on the language that's currently in the law. And that language is what drives the spending. Okay? So the money they have is they can continue the bill, so they could extend the law for another 10 years or 5 years, and they'd have the money to do that, but they wouldn't be able to change anything. Or if they did change something, they'd have to cut spending to pay for it, or they'd have to raise taxes to pay for it. So the problem is you got a lot of folks out there that want more money in the Farm Bill to be spent. So they want to raise the reference prices. They want to do some stuff in crop insurance. They want, even though conservation got $20 billion new money in the IRA, they want more money for conservation. The food stamps, yesterday, the whatever they call it, that kept the food stamps going during the pandemic, that ran out. So you're going to have people in SNAP that want more money for SNAP. So they can't spend any more money on the Farm Bill unless they get someplace to get the money from. Either cut the spending or raise taxes. And you can cut spending within the Farm Bill, but you'd set off a war. So, for example, you could take money out of conservation. They just got $20 billion of extra money. You could take some of that money and put it into Title I. And there's some Republicans talking about doing that. But if you did that, you would alienate all the conservation people. You could take SNAP money and move that into Title I. That would alienate the SNAP people. So the money thing is a big deal, but people are probably not paying a whole lot of attention to that.
Well, and if I can interject, it's not even about where we are right now with the targets, the existing farm bill, and moving money around or trying to kind of figure out how do you spend money that is already allocated and increase money. What we're being told in this whole discussion about the debt limit, and we know we're not going to raise the debt limit unless we cut certain levels of spending. Well, that's got to include the farm bill, right? That's got to include all of these programs. If in fact they cut a deal on budget reductions on discretionary or on these programs, what does that mean in terms of not just not getting the enhancements that people are asking for in terms of spending, but absolutely fighting over who's going to take the cut?
Well, I think that's premature. I mean, the last time we went through this in 2011, we ended up with sequestration, and that actually cut the farm bill because we couldn't get a deal at that point. I think, in a way, the fight over the debt ceiling might actually help the farm bill.
That is not what I was thinking. So now you need to explain this to me.
Well, because the fight over food stamps might end up in the debt ceiling and not in the farm bill. And if that's the case, it would make it easier to pass a farm bill. If you've already had that fight over work requirements and all that other stuff, which some of the Republicans are trying to do. Now that'll probably make it almost certain they won't be able to raise the debt ceiling. And that's a whole other issue.
But I think the point that I was trying to make, Colin, is that this debate about overall targets and spending that is now part of the debt limit, raising the debt limit, that is for positive or negative. It is part of the discussion that goes on in Washington that will affect the farm bill.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would say so the number one problem is SNAP and the nutrition stuff. You've got a lot of Republicans talking about that they're going to cut that program, which they've done the last two times. And that's the biggest danger to getting a farm bill done.
I agree.
Because if they cut $1 out of nutrition, the House Democrats will oppose it. And that's, some of the Senate Democrats will as well. So that's the biggest danger is getting on this kick to cut nutrition. And they've already cut it substantially because they've ended these extra benefits that they put in place because of the pandemic. So that's going to be the hurdle. The biggest hurdle to get by is that.
Joel, what are you hearing? Is there optimism out there that the farm bill can pass? Is there pessimism? What are the people you talk to every day saying?
Well, I think a lot of the farmers out there that I talk to just take it for granted that it's always going to be there. And I think that that's one of the things in talking to Colin and you that I think is the most dangerous for them. If you talk to the executives at Sugar and if you talk to people that run the Barley Council and all of them, they get it. They understand it, Farm Bureau, Farm Union. But if you just talk to a farmer, you stop in Morton and have a beer with the boys, they just assume it's going to get fixed again or it's not going to be a problem, in large part because
It always has.
of the two individuals I get to visit with here, because of Colin and Heidi and people that were elected like that. So Heidi, I just want to inject one little thing in this, okay? Now, I'm talking to you two, and you two were very good public servants. You understood it. People just heard that. But both of you got beat. And, so my question is, why do I care what farmers think about it for a while? Shouldn't they feel a little bit of pain before they start realizing who they should elect? Now, I realize that sounds pretty political, but that's a talk show host that said that. So either one of you can answer me, but I think they take you for granted, is my point.
Well, I don't think there's any question, but that's gone on for a long time. That's not just a new phenomenon. I think President Trump's administration exacerbated the problem. And that's why I didn't win, was because I was always able to bring people together, enough Republicans to get elected in that Republican district. But Trump polarized everybody so much, there was nothing I could do about it. And he did that all over the country. And so one of the biggest problems is, in agriculture, is that there's no Democrats left in farm districts. That is a huge problem. And so the only way you can get this bill passed is if you make the urban people happy. And that means conservation, and it means nutrition. And that's the stuff that some Republicans hate. So that's the tension, and how they get past that is probably the biggest challenge they have.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Colin, to point out that not all Republicans like the Farm Bill.
Oh, no, that's, yeah,
For years, that the Farm Bill was always supported by Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, George Bush vetoed it three times before
twice.
twice before you actually got a Farm Bill done. And so you still have some of those budget conscious hardliners saying the Farm Bill is bloated, and it's not just, they aren't just looking at nutrition. You look at the Republican Study Committee, I think is what it's called. They've called for cuts, and they've got over 100 members. And so, it's important to point out that Republicans alone probably can't get a farm bill done. They need to form those coalitions. And Joel, you asked, I was there for 6 years. I did 2 farm bills, and I'm very proud of the work that we did. But let me tell you, anytime I got stuck on an issue, anytime I couldn't figure out how the balance should work, I made one phone call, and that was to Congressman Peterson. Because as I've said repeatedly, Colin has forgotten more about the Farm Bill than most people know. And so the point that I'm making here is that this Farm Bill will be particularly difficult because you don't have that bridge between somebody, not just whose politics were important, where the Farm Bill was important to his politics, but where he knew the substance. This is an incredibly complicated series of programs that have been tied together. The compromises have been made over a long period of time. And if you don't know, if you say, I'm just going to go and pull that string and don't know what it's all connected to, it comes down like a house of cards. And I don't know that there are people, especially on the Democratic side, who understand what happens when you pull those strings. And, Colin, they're going to miss you. They're going to miss your insight and your understanding of these programs, but they're also going to miss the historic ties that have been, kind of put together to make this work as a big compromise piece of legislation.
And I'm not going, I'm still engaged. I've got people calling me every day asking me questions about what's going on right now, both Republicans and Democrats. So I'm going to be involved. I won't be the same as when I was there, but I've set up this Midwest Council on Agriculture, where we're coming together with a position on the Farm Bill. We're going to be involved in it, and part of the reason that I did that, because I didn't need the work, is to try to be helpful to try to get this thing worked out. And people say to me, Joel, like you just brought up, what the heck are you doing this for? They voted you out. Why don't you just go sit out at the lake and take it easy? Well, I feel a responsibility, whether people understand what they're doing or not. I had a farmer that was convinced by one of the state representatives that if he voted for my opponent, that she would become the chairman of the agriculture committee. And he believed it, and that's the kind of stuff you're up against. I mean, it's like people don't understand, government, and we're not teaching enough in school. I mean, we got a lot of good teachers out there like Paul Marquardt and so forth, but people are not learning about government. You wouldn't be having what's going on here with all this nonsense about elections if people understood how this worked. So anyway.
Well, and I do want to point out, and I think it's fair to say, not only is she not chair, but she's not on the committee. Took herself off the committee, but that's for another discussion. But
well, maybe that tells you maybe she's pressure. Maybe she's seeing the problem and she's going to get the heck out of there.
Yeah, but there's going to be okay. I think that when you look at kind of where politically the Farm Bill is right now, it's so much more important for Republicans to deliver a Farm Bill. That's their constituency. They've really built some solid majorities in many of these districts, many of the states like mine, but it's been dependent on delivering for rural America. And so there's a lot of political risk for Republicans not to deliver a Farm Bill. But I wanted to spend some time, Colin, talking about what you're hearing about the various titles. And we have a lot of people who listen to this podcast who kind of haven't breathed the Farm Bill the same way you have. So let's talk a little bit about the commodities title and what you're hearing from producers, what enhancements they want, what they want to change. I think that's behind crop insurance. Obviously the one that most of the farmers that I know spend the most time worrying and thinking about.
That's Title I of the Farm Bill. And that has become less and less important because these reference prices, target prices, have not been updated for a long time. And so I tried to do it in '07. I tried to raise the reference prices, and there was no interest at that time in doing it. So you've got, the reference.
Colin, can you just explain what raising the reference prices would do?
Yeah, I know too much about this. The reference price is what drives the PLC and ARC program, which pays farmers when prices go below a certain level, then they get a payment based on whatever program they're in. And it's based off of the reference price. So, for example, the reference price for soybeans is $8.50. So, I mean, you can tell that's a loss. I mean, that reference price is not a safety net because
Right.
it's way below the cost of production. I think corn is $3 and something reference price. Wheat is 4 something. And so these reference prices are not effective given the pricing that we have currently in the marketplace. So there's some folks out there that want to put money into the reference prices to try to have a better safety net. I don't think there's enough money to raise the reference prices enough to make any difference given the climate that we're in. I think the money, if there is money to be put into the safety net, it should be put into crop insurance. That is, without a doubt, the most important part of the farm bill. And there's some things that need to be improved in there, especially in livestock, some of the other specialty crops. And I think that would be a better use of that money than putting it in reference prices. But some of these groups are coming in. I think they're coming in asking for that. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. And, we can go through the other titles too, if you want to, and talk about
But let's kind of transition from there. Like that's a big part of the safety net. Reference prices haven't been adequate to cover cost of production. They aren't really what you would call a safety net. And you, like so many folks, go right to the provisions of the crop insurance program. So when you look at crop insurance, it was kind of this morphing from direct payments into kind of a system whereby when things are good, you're going to get money, or you're not going to get money. When things are bad, you are going to get money. But it seems like everybody always gets money anyway, Colin. So explain this the way you would explain it to somebody sitting in an apartment in Manhattan.
I'm not sure you can explain it. Well, you can't really talk about what's happened the last few years because that was an aberration. We spent $100 billion, under the Trump administration. That's never going to be done again. So I think we should take that out of the equation. But the crop insurance still got some problems, and it's a lot better than it was. It was for a long time. It was just corn and soybeans and wheat and the major crops, and now we've added a lot of crops to it. We have we started having programs for livestock, that need to be improved. And so if I had extra money, what I would do is I'd go in there and start improving those crop insurance things in the areas where they're not adequate. And that's not that expensive. So, I think they're going to have to look at places where doesn't cost them a lot of money to get the bang for the buck. And so, again, I think the first place is crop insurance. And then crop insurance also has some other issues that are out there. I probably shouldn't say this with North Dakota, but this prevented planting is still a problem. And we've made some improvements, but there are problems out there going on in prevented planting. And I think Congress is probably going to take a look at that.
I think what's going to happen is you probably will get a GAO report, or you're going to get some kind of official government report that discloses, kind of repeated uses of prevent plant. And then all of a sudden people are going to, we've had this before, right?
That information is out there, Heidi.
Yeah.
But nobody has really picked up on it yet. But I think the leaders on the committee are going to have to deal with this. Well, I'm getting complaints all the time from farmers about folks they think are farming too much ground, and they're not able to go and take care of the ground that they've got. So they end up using preventive planting because they didn't plant at the right time, or when there was a window, they couldn't get to it, whatever. So those are issues that are very valid. and are going to have to be addressed.
And Joel, and I know, a farmer drives by, he got his crop in, the guy next door doesn't,
Yep.
and in the field next to him, and they wonder, well, what's the deal there?
Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah, there was a time when you sat there and you talked about, okay, how many acres should you farm? Is this a big farm? Is that a big farm? Those definitions aren't there anymore. I mean, in my day growing up, if you had a 5,000 acre farm, you were huge. You were absolutely huge. If you don't got 5,000 acres now, you're in trouble in many of these guys' case, especially with what they're paying for cash rent. Then you add in the fact, and I think Colin knows this, and you know this, Heidi, that they don't have the workers. They can't find the guys. I mean, every 70-year-old man that's retired from farming is driving a semi bringing corn out of the field. Everyone. My buddy who just got out of hauling fuel, it took him about 2 seconds before a farmer talked him into it, and he didn't want to do it. So it's a different time out there. Cash rent is never going down. The people that their mom and dad had that land, they don't live here anymore. They live somewhere else. And so they could care less if the neighbor's mad that they're paying $180 an acre for cash rent. If they can get $250 from somebody else and it isn't their relative, tough. They're getting the $250. I mean, that's today's farming. When they sell land, they go to an auctioneer now instead of calling the neighbor and saying, hey, I think I'm going to sell that quarter. You've been my neighbor for years. Those days are over. And so, Congressman, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys, they're not giving in.
And, now they're starting to auction rent.
Yeah.
That's the latest thing. So now they're auctioning off the rental land out there, which used to be pretty stable. Now they're putting that up for auction.
But can I ask this, you guys? I mean, so we talk about that. We talk about the new farm economy and how it's going to work, but you got soybeans at $14 and they're getting 60 bushel soybeans on a dry year. And if I'm the person with that land, I have no sympathy for them if I raise the cash rent.
Oh, I know.
None.
No, I get it. But that's going to come home to roost. We're not going to have $14 soybeans forever. And that's why I think the best place we can put the safety net right now is in crop insurance. So at least, when you have a failure, you're not going to go completely under. But I don't know how people justify paying what they're paying for this land or this rent. It does not make any sense.
And look who the competition is. I raised this at the last hearing. I think Sonny Perdue was the Senate hearing that I had with Secretary Perdue. And I said, who's farming the land out there? Who owns the land that's being farmed? And, but when Joel and I were growing up, and you, Colin, Grandpa and Grandma phased out of farming. The kids took over the farm. Maybe the boy, one of the sons moved off and taught in town. And, you had somebody else who may have moved to the city and become an accountant. And all that land kind of stayed in the family. But maybe when Grandpa and Grandma died, everybody divided it equally. And then the brothers just rented it to the brothers, right? So we're out of that now. We're in the second generation, right? And the second generation has never lived on the farm. They've never, kind of connected to that family heritage, to that family legacy of farming that land. And now they're saying, look, I want to maximize the return on investment. We're going to keep this. And so now that farmland is owned by 20 people instead of 4 people, right? The next generation. And everybody has an opinion. And the opinion mainly is maximizing revenue. And so eventually the challenge that we're going to have is the further that ownership of that land goes from people who actually had the experience on the farm, the tougher it is for these prices to come down, the tougher it is to manage the farming situation. And eventually what's going to happen is somebody with a lot of money, and in North Dakota, that appears to be Bill Gates, is going to come in and buy up farmland because God's not making any more of that, right? So these land ownership challenges are going to be a generational problem. And if they're a problem today, it's going to be worse in 20 years.
Absolutely.
I've got one I want to throw at you guys. So, and you got to remember, folks out there listening, I'm the talk show host, so it's my job to create trouble. But put yourself in the shoes of Hakeem Jeffries, right? You're sitting there and you can't get Colin Peterson and Heidi Heitkamp where you need to be, which is sitting next to you. After all of that. So let me ask you, just from a political, the door is shut take, okay? The only way, if you're sitting there debating this, you have to throw into the debate that farmers aren't going to start voting Democrat again in the middle of this country until they feel some pain. That if we keep solving their problems, they're going to go back to gays, guns, and God. I mean, that's where these people are at out there. They know that with what Colin Peterson and Heidi Heitkamp have done, they don't got anything to worry about. Nothing to worry about in their mind. And so, if you're Hakeem Jeffries and you're the minority leader, you're like, look, as long as they're happy, they're going to keep voting Republican. And we're going to continue to not have Democrats elected in the middle of this country. And I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
Heidi, you want me to take that?
You go ahead.
Well, it's definitely a problem. The role that I played the last 10, 15 years with Nancy Pelosi was to get her to understand how important farmers and farming was to the economy in our districts. And now that there's only Republicans there, you're right. There's not going to be the same kind of political will to fix it if it becomes a problem. But one thing about Democrats is that we care too damn much about stuff, and so whether it makes any sense or not, we're going to try to do the right thing, and we're going to fix it. You know what I mean? And that's what we're going to do. And there's still people like that out in D.C. In the Democratic Party. There's not very many of them, but there are still some people like that. And Hakeem, I've been kind of talking to him through surrogates, and it's hard to say how it's going to play out. But if I can tell you this, Jim McGovern is now the third or fourth ranking member on the Ag Committee. He's from Boston, basically, Massachusetts. Got no farmland. He's a good guy. He doesn't care about anything in the farm bill except nutrition. That's his thing. That's all he cares about. And I kept him happy. That was my job. If I got Jim McGovern happy with whatever I was doing, then I got a lot of votes from urban people because they follow him. Okay? So I don't know if there's anybody now trying to keep Jim McGovern happy.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a problem. So that's why I say the SNAP stuff is the most important thing that they've got to try to figure out how to deal with.
I'm going to ask kind of one final question here to both of you. And we'll start with you, Joel. If you had to look up and say, what is rural America going to look like in 20 years without any changes in policy, what do you see?
Bigger in terms of farmers. There's no question. And I'm not sure anybody can stop that. I think that you're going to see more corporate farming. You mentioned Bill Gates earlier. North Dakota was one of the last bastions of holding out when it comes to corporate farming. There's a bill going through the state legislature that opens it up somewhat when it comes to livestock. And so, we're kind of on this island, but, I think the renewables are locked in now. I think they're going to have a rate. But for me, I think there's going to be a lot more distance between the mailboxes. That's what I believe.
And what does that mean for rural communities? What does that mean for the political clout of rural America, Joel?
Well, it means less people going to that church, right? I mean, less people going to that small Class B school. What it means is that Fargo, which a lot of people listening to this are going to say, well, okay, that isn't that big of a town, but Fargo's 150,000 people now. And when the congressman first got in, he represented Moorhead, which meant he represented Fargo. And when you first got in, Heidi, this wasn't that long ago. It was about 110,000 people. And so everybody's moving to these places and they're not living on the farm anymore. Then you add in the fact that Joel Heitkamp had 2 kids, Heidi Heitkamp had 2 kids, and mom and dad had 7. And we were the small family in the Catholic Church. So people are having less kids. There's less people want to live out in the country. Their idea of living out in the country is living 15 minutes from town where they can maybe have a goat. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's going to be less farms. And the farms that are there are going to be more corporate by structure, and they're going to be bigger. They're going to be The average farm is going to be way, way bigger.
So your opinion is it's inevitable.
That's their biggest problem.
So Colin, I'm going to ask you the same thing. You've been at this a long time. You have been, kind of the one thing that you've always been able to do is see the train at the end of the tunnel and think about what you're going to do to avoid it. What do you see is the future of rural America? Is it inevitable? And if it's not, what do we need to do to change course?
Joel is right. These farms are going to get bigger. I would kind of disagree with this whole discussion about corporate farms because most farmers nowadays are corporations. These are family corporations. They're not like Bill Gates. So you've got people that have a 5,000 acre farm, 10,000 acre farm. It's in the family. It's a farm. It's a sub S or a LLC, and it's owned by the family. And so you talk about corporate farming, you can't go after those kind of people because you're going to screw up the whole system. So we have a problem with people understanding what's really going on out there in the countryside. It's not like it's like they're saying, well, the corporations are taking over everything. Well, I was incorporating my clients 40 years ago in corporations, the farm. So,
Yeah, but Congressman, your clients weren't Cargill.
well, no, I'm not. Cargill is not farming that much land.
No, but my point is that could open up. That's my point.
I don't think Cargill wants anything to do with
Well, I
that.
just use Cargill as an example. I mean, pick one.
Well, okay, I tell you what the danger is. If you get the extreme, and people are going to think I'm nuts, but the reason that you can have these families to have 5,000 acres, 10,000 acres, is because they have crop insurance. If they didn't have crop insurance, the banker would not finance that operation. And if you have that size of a farm, you're going to have to borrow $500,000, $1 million to put that crop in. So what crop insurance does, it allows those people to be able to finance their operation. If you didn't have crop insurance, just think about it. So if you got rid of crop insurance, what would happen? The people that have deep pockets would farm. And then you would have what you're talking about. Then you'd have the people that have enough cash that they don't have to have insurance. They can finance their own situation. That's the biggest danger, in my opinion. Now there's some talk about trying to limit the size of the crop insurance and so forth. But if you get into that debate, what happens is the crop insurance statute says it has to be actuarially sound.
Yeah.
And you take the big guys out and the system doesn't work.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you have to try to balance all this stuff out. We're so blessed in this country to have the efficiency that we have in agriculture. And because of it, we have low cost food, that's the envy of the whole world, and we don't want to screw that up. So the answer to the question is, where's this going? What are we going to do? I think you're going to see, if they get a new farm bill done, it's going to be minimal change from what we're currently dealing with, in my opinion. I don't think there are going to be a whole lot of changes anyplace. And frankly, if they don't get a farm bill done, it's not the end of the world. Because if they don't get a farm bill, they can extend the current law for 5 years and it doesn't cost them any money at all. And they could do that with just a stroke of the pen.
And just to clarify, it doesn't cost them any money beyond what they're spending right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the budget situation, yeah.
Yeah.
And, and that may be what the outcome. That could very well be the outcome.
Colin, thanks so much, because that is the best explanation of why people say, well, why would they extend it? People have no idea that if they don't extend it, the old law becomes effective. If you want to see money spent, that's where you're going to see money spent. So I want to kind of put a final point, and maybe it's someplace between Joel and Colin. I think it's not just about corporate farming. It's about land ownership. This idea, when we used to drive around the country, we'd say, well, that's Lingen's quarter, and that's Crump's quarter, and that's Krause's quarter, right? I mean, we kind of knew who owned the land. We knew who was farming the land. And when we get 4 or 5 generations away from the farm, which, right now we're 3 generations away from the farm, the people own the land, they're disconnected from the kind of challenges that you have in agriculture. And they look at this the way you would look at an apartment building, right? Where we look at the land as as part of the culture of rural America. We look at the land as a critical component of the fabric and the culture of rural America. This land ownership issue and trying to figure out how we are going to keep people invested in building out and politically invested in helping farmers is I think going to be a challenge as the population of rural America continues to decline, which it is. It's already older, sicker than the rest of the country, right? As the population declines, the political viability of these programs also declines. And that's why it's so critically important that we look at the entire fabric of rural America, not just what's happening in farm country, but what does that mean for the schools? What does it mean for the churches? What does it mean for the hospitals and rural healthcare? And so when we extend what we already have, I think to Joel's point, Colin, you're basically buying the same kind of trend line that we're seeing right now. And you both agree it's going to be bigger farms, which means fewer people, more automation, Joel. That's how they're going to solve the problem of workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
More automation. And I think we ought to have at least one discussion of at the end of 20 years, what do we want rural America to be? And I don't think we have that discussion because we're too busy trying to protect what's going to happen next year. So that's my preaching point.
And I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen in 20 years anyway,
Well, I'm going to be
Well,
retired.
Not how smart
I'll tell you that.
No matter how smart you are.
Well,
Sure.
I think
You might not be able to. You might have to keep
Well, I'm
in
going to
there.
get Sue working. I mean, she's going to be working. I'm just not going to be. Yeah, at Big Iron this year, Colin knows this. They had a self-propelled combine out there running all on its own. It's what it's going to be. That's for sure.
Well, and that's my point. My point is, and not a Luddite. I mean, I'm not somebody who wants to throw a shoe in the cog, not a saboteur. But I do think that whatever direction we head in rural America should be purposeful. But when you say you can't predict it, what I would tell you, Colin, is you could look at trend lines and think about how stable those trend lines have been over a period of time from the 1950s down. And that the trend lines are not good for rural America.
No, you're right.
Well, and one last thing, you guys, and I simple yes or no. Is everything we discussed here today, knowing the circumstances, knowing the bill, everything, is everything we discussed here today going to get more Democrats elected in the middle of this country?
No.
Heidi?
No.
There.
No.
In fact, if the Democrats help to do what's right, they will elect more Republicans.
That's been my point.
That's yeah. So it's a hell of a note.
Well, thanks, Colin, for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you guys.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Thanks so much for listening. And I know we got a little wonky with the acronyms, but that's Farm Bill talk. But let me tell you, I think that this is a critical issue that we hear about all the time in rural America. It's the premier piece of legislation that reflects the values and the culture and the economic necessity of rural America. And I think it's something that we all need to understand, because not only is it important to rural America, but it's important to urban America when we look at food security, both in terms of having an adequate production, but also in terms of being able to afford it when you go to the grocery store, which is getting tougher. Joel, you have any closing comments?
No, it felt a lot like at times during the show, I realized, folks, that we were in the FDR administration, a lot of letters out there versus explaining what they were. But the Farm Bill's complicated. I get it. I understand it. In the end, we didn't talk a lot about the politics of it, but what we did talk about was the mechanics. And that's what Colin Peterson has been great at for years. But it was fun. And I think they're both right to take the high ground. For me personally, I think every now and then you got to take the gloves off and mix it up a little bit.
Thanks, Joel.
You bet.